At my engagement party, my father raised his glass. I expected him to say something about love, commitment, maybe even how proud he was. Instead, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll never inherit a cent. You're not really mine." The room froze. The clinking of glasses stopped midair. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Even the DJ fumbled with the music, and the background melody faded into an awkward silence. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't even lower my own champagne glass. I just smiled. The same smile I'd practiced in the mirror over the years. The one that hid everything I felt. "Since we're revealing family secrets," I said, letting my voice carry just enough to be heard over the stunned quiet, "I have one too." And that's when I reached into my clutch and pulled out a white envelope. From across the table, my stepmother's perfect smile, the one she wore like armor, slipped. Her knuckles went white around the stem of her wine glass. Her eyes darted toward my father, then back to me, calculating, searching. She knew what I had in my hand, but I didn't open it. Not yet. This wasn't the moment to detonate the entire truth. No. This was the moment to plant the fuse. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room on me. Friends, extended family, colleagues from my fiancé's law firm. Some leaned forward, eager for gossip. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure if they should excuse themselves to the restroom or stay for the drama. My fiancé, Daniel, was at my side, his hand resting lightly on my back. I could sense the tension in his fingers. He didn't know the full story yet. Not everything. But he knew enough to trust that I wouldn't do this without a reason. "Don't worry," I said lightly, letting the edge of a smile curve my lips. "We'll get back to dinner soon, but since my father has chosen to update the family record, I think it's only fair that we all leave here tonight knowing the whole truth." There was a murmur. Phones started to come out. The quiet, sneaky kind of recording people do when they think they're being discreet. I caught the faint reflection of red recording lights in the wine glasses. I didn't care. In fact, I counted on it. You might be wondering what kind of person stands in the middle of her own engagement party, in a designer dress under strings of fairy lights and crystal chandeliers, and hints at a scandal big enough to silence an entire banquet hall. The answer is, the kind of person who has been pushed to the edge for years. Because that night wasn't just about my father's cruelty. It was about a lifetime of being kept on the outside of the family he built without me. My father, Richard Hayes, had always been a man who loved control more than connection. He was the kind of person who could turn a dinner table into a boardroom without anyone noticing, until you realized you'd just been cross-examined over dessert. When my mother died in a car accident when I was 6, he remarried quickly. Too quickly. 6 months later, Caroline was in our house, rearranging furniture, moving my mother's things into storage, and smiling through every forced introduction. To the outside world, Caroline was perfect. Elegant, gracious, the kind of woman who never had a hair out of place and could charm a room without saying more than 3 sentences. But behind closed doors, she made sure I knew exactly where I stood. "You're lucky your father kept you here," she'd say casually while flipping through glossy magazines in the living room. Most men in his position would have sent you to boarding school. And my father, he never defended me. He'd just adjust his tie and say nothing, as if silence could erase the sting of her words. When I turned 18, I moved out, got my own place, worked 2 jobs to put myself through university. I told myself I was free, but in truth, my father's shadow followed me everywhere. In the way people treated me when they realized who my family was. In the way Caroline always seemed to know things about my life she shouldn't have known. The envelope I held that night at my engagement party? I'd been carrying it for weeks. It contained the results of something I'd been quietly investigating for months. A truth that would flip Caroline's carefully crafted image upside down and leave my father with no more illusions about the woman he'd chosen over his own daughter. I hadn't planned to use it at my engagement party. I wanted that night to be about Daniel and me. But when my father decided to humiliate me, to declare in front of everyone that I was not his blood and not his heir, he gave me the stage I didn't even know I'd been waiting for. The air in the room was electric. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "Laura," my father said, his voice low but sharp. Put that away. This is not the time. I tilted my head just slightly, the way Caroline always did when she was about to deliver a cutting remark. Oh, I think it's exactly the time. Gasps rippled across the room. Caroline's hand slipped from her wine glass to her lap where it clenched into a fist. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I slid it back into my clutch and smiled sweetly. Let's enjoy dinner, I said. We can talk more after dessert. And just like that, the tension shifted. People sat back down. Conversations resumed in low, uneasy murmurs, and the party continued. But every single person in that room knew one thing. Something was coming. And when it did, no one would leave unscathed. People always assume betrayals happen in one explosive moment, that a relationship shatters with a single argument or mistake. But in my family, it didn't happen that way. It started as a quiet erosion. When my mother was alive, our home was warm in ways you can't measure. She had this way of making even ordinary days feel special. Pancakes for dinner when it rained, handwritten notes in my lunchbox, music playing while we cleaned the house together. When she died in that car accident, it was like the color drained out of everything. My father, Richard, didn't cry at the funeral. He stood perfectly straight, jaw tight, shaking hands with people like it was a business meeting. I didn't know it then, but that was his way of surviving, shutting everything out before it could touch him. For 6 months after, it was just the two of us. Dinners were quiet, but I tried to believe we'd find our way back to something like normal. Then Caroline appeared. I first met her in our kitchen. I came home from school to find a stranger in a silk blouse leaning against the counter like she'd always belonged there. She was laughing at something my father said. That laugh that would later grate on me like nails on glass. Laura, my father said, with a tone so formal it made me straighten up. This is Caroline. She's a friend. Caroline crouched down to my height, her perfume hitting me before her smile did. Oh, you're even prettier than Richard described, she said, like she was complimenting a doll she might buy. I remember thinking she was beautiful. Perfectly curled hair, red lipstick that never seemed to smudge, but her eyes didn't match her smile. They were cold, sharp, assessing. Within weeks, she wasn't just visiting. She was staying overnight. A month later, her things were in my mother's closet. By the end of the year, they were married. At first, she tried to win me over. Shopping trips, little gifts, girl time that was really just her parading me around to her friends. But whenever my father wasn't around, the tone shifted. You should be grateful your father kept you, she'd say offhandedly while flipping through a fashion magazine. Other men would have sent you away. I'd laugh like it was a joke, but my stomach always tightened. Over time, the house changed. The walls that had been lined with family photos of my mother and me were replaced with glossy portraits of Caroline and my father, staged like magazine spreads. My mother's favorite armchair was sent to storage. The kitchen that used to smell like cinnamon and fresh bread now smelled like whatever expensive candles Caroline ordered in bulk. But the biggest change wasn't in the decor. It was in my father. He'd always been reserved, but now he seemed absent. When I tried to talk about school or my friends, he'd nod politely, like a stranger making conversation on a train. When I got into the debate club, he congratulated me as though I'd gotten a small promotion at work. Caroline, meanwhile, had mastered the art of exclusion. Dinner conversations revolved around her social calendar, her charity work, her friends' vacation homes. I learned to sit quietly, to fade into the background, because any attempt to join in was met with a polite but firm, "That's not really relevant, dear." When I turned 18, I moved into a small apartment across town. My father didn't protest. Caroline congratulated me like I'd gotten a job in another city. Independence is good for you, she said. Besides, you can't live off your father forever. I worked part-time at a cafe while studying business administration at the local university. I rarely saw them, except for holidays or the occasional formal dinner. Those dinners were always the same. Caroline playing hostess, my father making polite conversation, me counting the minutes until I could leave. Then, 2 years ago, I noticed something. It was at a charity gala Caroline had organized. I was there mostly out of obligation, wearing a dress I couldn't afford, but needed to look appropriate. As she worked the room, I watched her charm donors laugh a little too long at certain men's jokes, lean in just a little too close. It wasn't unusual. Caroline was a flirt. But that night, I saw her with someone I recognized, a man named Thomas Bennett, a wealthy real estate developer my father had done business with for years. They slipped out to the balcony together, laughing. 10 minutes later, they returned, both of them flushed. My father didn't notice, or didn't care. I did. That night planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't shake. Over the months that followed, I started noticing patterns. The way Caroline's lunches with friends often coincided with Thomas's trips into the city. The late-night phone calls she took in the study with the door closed, the unexplained jewelry that appeared without occasion. I didn't have proof, but I had a feeling. And feelings, I've learned, are where all great revenge stories begin. By the time Daniel proposed to me, I had almost let it go. My life was moving forward. I was building something separate from my father and Caroline's world. But then, Caroline started inserting herself into my wedding plans, making choices for me, inviting people I'd never met, dismissing my ideas with that sweet, poisonous smile. I realized then that I wasn't free of her. Not really. She still saw me as something to control, or erase. So I started digging, quietly, methodically, and when I finally found what I was looking for, I put it in an envelope. The same envelope I carried into my engagement party. The same one that made her smile vanish the moment she saw it. If there's one thing I learned from growing up with Caroline, it's that she underestimated me. She thought I was quiet, that I kept my head down because I was timid. But really, I was observing. And if you watch people long enough, they always reveal themselves. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd stopped by my father's house to drop off some engagement party invitations in person. Caroline was supposed to be out for her standing lunch with a friend named Melissa. Her calendar was always packed with those lunches. Too many, in fact, for someone who never seemed to know much about Melissa when I asked. I pulled into the driveway and noticed her car wasn't there. Inside, the house was quiet, but on the kitchen counter was a small jewelry box. The lid was open, revealing a diamond bracelet. It wasn't my father's style. Too flashy, too modern. The receipt was still inside. Paid for by T. Bennett, Thomas Bennett. I stood there staring at the receipt, my mind spinning. Maybe it was a gift for a charity auction. Maybe my father had asked him to pick it up. I could have believed that, if I hadn't also noticed the date and time. 2 days earlier, exactly when Caroline had claimed to be getting her nails done. From that point on, I stopped trying to convince myself there was nothing going on. I needed to know, and I knew better than to confront her without proof. The next week, I made sure to be in the neighborhood during one of her lunch dates. I parked across from the restaurant she'd named my father, but she never showed up. Instead, at exactly 12:15, I saw her walk out of the parking garage 2 blocks away, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, and slide into a black Mercedes that pulled up beside her. Thomas Bennett was driving. I stayed far enough behind to avoid being noticed. They drove across town to the Lakeshore Hotel, one of those 5-star places with private entrances. They didn't come out for 2 hours. I wish I could say I felt shocked. But mostly, I felt this heavy, sinking confirmation, like the answer to a question I'd been avoiding was finally too loud to ignore. And I decided then, if Caroline was going to blow up my family again, it would be on my terms. I started small. Whenever I visited my father, I'd excuse myself to make a call and walk past Caroline's study. She guarded that room like a fortress, but she was careless about leaving things on her desk. One afternoon, I spotted a folded receipt from a boutique hotel in the city. Same initials, TB, same pattern. Another time, I caught her on the phone in the garden, laughing in that way she only did with Thomas. She didn't see me. Or maybe she didn't care. I began taking photos, quietly, methodically. A blurry shot of her getting into Thomas's car. A close-up of the hotel receipt. Screenshots of public posts from Thomas's social media that matched her lunch days exactly. Him in a lobby, her mysteriously unavailable. The most damning evidence came by accident. One Saturday, my father asked me to drop off some files at the house while he was at a golf tournament. Caroline was out of town visiting her sister. Except when I pulled into the driveway, Thomas's Mercedes was parked at the side of the house. I killed my engine and sat there for a moment, heart pounding. Through the living room window, I could see them. Caroline leaning against the back of the couch, Thomas close enough to touch her hair. He said something that made her laugh and swat at his arm. That was when my stomach turned, because she wasn't just wearing any outfit. She was wearing my mother's silk scarf, the one that had been lost years ago. That scarf made it personal. I took a photo through the gap in the curtains. My hands were shaking, but I made sure it was clear. Caroline's face, Thomas's face, the scarf, it wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about disrespect, about erasing my mother's place in our family piece by piece. After that, I went further. I asked a friend who worked in admin at a private lab if they could quietly run a paternity test if I brought in samples. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions when I explained it was for family peace of mind. I didn't have children of my own, but Caroline had a son with my father, James. He was 12, quiet, a little shy. I'd always liked him. And for years, I'd heard whispers about how much he looked like an old friend of Caroline's. I hated myself for even considering it. But if Caroline had lied about one thing, who was to say where the lies ended? I waited until James stayed with me one weekend when my father and Caroline were in Milan. I collected a used straw from his juice box. Later, I borrowed a comb from my father's bathroom. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Not a match. When I saw the envelope with the results, my hands went cold. I'd gone looking for proof of an affair and found something bigger. Something that would blow apart every illusion my father had about his marriage and about his own child. That envelope was the same one I carried into my engagement party. And I knew, deep down, that Caroline saw it not as paper, but as a loaded weapon. Dinner tasted like nothing. I chewed, nodded at compliments about the centerpieces, laughed when people made small talk about venues and cake flavors, and all the while I felt the envelope against my ribs like a second heartbeat. The fairy lights over the garden buzzed softly. A breeze lifted the hems of dresses and carried whispers from table to table. Daniel leaned in. "You don't have to do this tonight," he murmured, fingers lacing with mine under the table. "I didn't plan to," I said, but he chose the timing. Across the lawn, my father held court at a cluster of tables. Chin high, cufflinks shining, telling a story about a merger everyone had already read in the paper. Caroline stood half a step behind him, one hand on his shoulder, the other around a glass of Sauvignon Blanc she barely touched. She laughed at all the right moments. Her smile had recovered, but it never reached her eyes. Every few minutes, she flicked her gaze toward me, checking that the envelope was still real, that this wasn't a bluff I'd put away during the main course. The band switched from jazz to something slower. The servers cleared plates. Dessert, pistachio semi-freddo with raspberries, arrived like a peace offering I didn't accept. The DJ tapped the mic. "We'll open the floor for toasts in a few minutes. If anyone would like to—" "I would," I said, standing. My chair scraped lightly on the flagstone. Conversations dimmed, then softened into the expectant hush of an audience that senses a twist coming and can't stop watching. Daniel squeezed my hand once, then let go. "I'm here," he whispered. I crossed the lawn, the train of my dress whispering behind me. When I reached the mic, I didn't look at my father first. I looked at my guests. My friends, Daniel's colleagues, neighbors from my building, a handful of relatives who still used holiday cards to communicate. The people who knew pieces of me, but not the whole. "Thank you all for being here," I began, steady. "Tonight is supposed to be about love and beginnings, and it still is. But before we go any further, I need to correct the record." A ripple moved through the crowd. The fairy lights reflected as tiny constellations in the glasses. My father, I said, finally meeting Richard's eyes, announced earlier that I'm not really his and that I'll never inherit a cent. He chose a public setting to say something private. I won't match his cruelty, but I won't pretend it didn't happen. Caroline stepped forward a fraction, manicured fingers tightening on his shoulder. Laura, I'll be brief, I said, and the softness in my voice quieted the murmurs. First, biology doesn't make a family. Care does. Showing up does. Keeping promises does. My mother, Ava, did all of that. I am her daughter in every way that counts. I let that settle. A few heads nodded. Daniel's mother, my university friend Maya, even the florist who'd stayed to pack up later. Second, I continued, turning slightly toward Caroline. Since we're revealing family secrets, I want clarity, not spectacle. So I'll show this. I lifted the envelope. And then I'm asking you all for one thing. Kindness to a child who didn't choose any of this. Caroline's smile broke, like glass under pressure. I slid the documents out, not with a flourish, but with the practical movement of a person filing a report. These are hotel receipts and photographs, I said, placing the images on the cocktail table beside the mic, face down. They show repeated meetings between Caroline and Thomas Bennett over the last year, dates that align with times she told my father she was at lunches or salon appointments. There's also a gift receipt, bracelet, diamonds, purchased by Mr. Bennett and delivered to our home. I didn't lift the photos. I didn't need to. I don't need to describe the images. They speak. A hush fell so complete I could hear the paper settle. My father stared at the envelope as though it had grown teeth. And this, I said, lifting the second sheet, is a laboratory report. I obtained it because rumors had been used as weapons in my family for years, and I wanted truth. It is not a toy. It is not for social media. It says that my father is not the biological parent of Caroline's son. A single breath, pulled in by dozens of people at once, became a wind. I kept my voice level. James is 12. He is gentle and he loves chess and science fiction and blueberry pancakes. This is not his fault. If you take anything from tonight, let it be that. Do not punish a child for the lies of adults. From somewhere, a fork clinked against a plate. No one moved to pick it up. Caroline found her voice first. You had no right, she said, throat tight. This is a private matter. You violated... I protected myself, I said, from being erased, from being told again that I don't belong in the family my mother built. I didn't publish anything. I didn't send it to reporters. I came to the people whose trust has been traded like currency at this table for years and said, stop lying to each other. My father's jaw worked as if he were chewing gravel. Laura, he said, and I had to look at him then, because it was both my name and a question. When? When you chose Caroline's image over my reality, I said simply. When it became clear that the silence you called dignity had become complicity. He stared at the papers but didn't touch them. Behind him, two of his partners from the firm avoided each other's eyes. Thomas Bennett was not present. Conveniently, in Boston. The space where his place card sat at our table felt suddenly loud. Caroline took a breath and tried for softness. Richard, this is a misunderstanding. She's misread. Don't, I said. Not sharp, but final. Please don't make me recite dates and rooms and times in front of my friends and his colleagues and my grandmother's bridge partner. Don't make me name the scarf you wore while you stood in my mother's living room with someone who wasn't your husband. Caroline's face drained. Somewhere near the back, a woman whispered, "Oh," and then nothing else. I turned back to the mic, my hands steady now that the worst was said. I'm not here for money. Keep the trust. Keep the house. Keep the foundation and the board seats and the china. I'm here to draw a line between truth and performance. I am marrying a man who knows me. I intend to have a life where love is not a weapon and secrets are not currency. I looked at my father. You hurt me tonight. You've hurt me for years by standing still while other people acted. If you want to fix it, start with James. Tell him the truth. Gently, with help. He deserves certainty more than anyone here. Silence held for 3 long beats. Then Daniel walked up, not to shield me, but to stand beside me. Equal. He set a hand on the small of my back. We'd like to invite everyone to give us a few minutes, he said into the mic, voice calm. Please enjoy coffee inside. We'll rejoin you soon. Chairs scraped. A tide of guests moved toward the house, some glancing back, most grateful for instructions. When the lawn thinned to family, I lowered the mic and faced them without its protection. I won't discuss the documents further tonight, I said. There are lawyers and therapists for that, but the pretending ends here. My father looked older than he had an hour ago. He nodded once, a small, broken movement. I hear you, he said, voice rough. For the first time, I think. Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, then picked up her clutch. She walked past me without a word. Her heels sounded like a metronome counting down a song that had finally ended. I exhaled. The fairy lights hummed. Somewhere inside, the band started playing again. Slower, kinder. Daniel's fingers threaded through mine. It's still our engagement party, he said softly. It is, I said, surprised to find I meant it. And it's the first honest one I've ever been to. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. For a second, I didn't know what day it was. Then my body remembered before my brain did. A knot low in my stomach, the taste of adrenaline that hadn't fully left. Missed calls. My father, twice. A text from Daniel already at the office. Coffee on your counter. I'm a call away. A message from an unknown number that only said, you went too far. I blocked it without replying. I stood in the quiet of our kitchen, hands wrapped around the warm mug, and replayed the garden lights, the hush, Caroline's face when I mentioned the scarf. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like removing a splinter you'd been pretending wasn't there. Relief edged with soreness. At 8:12 a.m., my father called again. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Laura, he said, voice hoarse. I need your help. There were 1,000 ways I could have answered. Now you call. I'm not your assistant. Ask your wife. But none of them would help the only person who didn't deserve any of this. Is this about James? I asked. Yes. A pause. I don't know where to start. He's at school. Caroline didn't come home. I closed my eyes. We shouldn't tell him alone. He'll need a safe place and someone trained to guide the conversation. I already called Dr. Patel, he said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. From the family center you volunteer at. She said she could see us this afternoon if you come. I stared at the steam lifting off my coffee. I'll be there, I said. Thank you, he whispered, and in that single word I heard something I hadn't heard from him in years. Humility. The hours between the call and the appointment stretched like rubber. I worked from our small dining table, taking 2 client calls that I barely remember. At 11, Daniel came home with sandwiches we didn't touch. You don't have to carry all of them, he said gently, thumb brushing my wrist. I don't, I said. Just this one. At 2:45, I pulled into the lot outside the family center. It smelled like temper paint and hand sanitizer and the faint sweetness of the bakery next door. I'd sat with dozens of kids here, listened while they tried to give shape to feelings too big for their bodies. It felt different to arrive as family. My father was already in the lobby, suit wrinkled, eyes raw. He stood when he saw me and for a second looked like he might hug me, then thought better of it and shoved his hands in his pockets. We didn't do hugs yet. Maybe someday. Thank you for coming, he said. I'm here for James, I said, and watched the flinch ripple across his face. Then I softened. And for you if you listen. He nodded, too fast. James arrived with the after-school bus, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair sticking to his forehead under a too-big hoodie. He brightened when he saw me. "Laura, did you bring the new chess book?" I swallowed. "Next time, buddy. We're going to talk with Dr. Patel today, okay? All of us." His eyes flicked from me to my father and back again, reading the room with the quick intuition of a kid who learned early to measure weather by adult faces. "Am I in trouble?" "No," I said immediately. "You didn't do anything wrong." Inside Dr. Patel's office, the walls were covered in drawings and a dry erase board with the words, "Feelings don't make you bad," in neat handwriting. She was small, with calm eyes and the kind of voice that turned panic into sentences. We sat in a loose circle. My father couldn't quite look at James, so he looked at me. I shook my head once. "Not me." Dr. Patel caught the movement, then addressed my father without judgment. "Richard, you asked for this. You can begin. I'm here to help you say it clearly and kindly." He took a breath that sounded like it hurt. "James," he said, turning to him, "I love you. That is true in every way that matters. I am your dad by choice and by every day we've spent together. That will not change." His voice wavered. "But there is something about your biology I didn't know and just learned." James's hands stilled on the strap of his backpack. "What do you mean?" Dr. Patel leaned in slightly. "Sometimes adults find out new information about families. It can be scary, but it doesn't change who shows up for you." My father swallowed. "I learned that I'm not your biological father." For a second, James's face went blank, and I remembered science lessons, the way kids categorize the world. Then he frowned. "So, am I adopted?" "No," my father said quickly. "I signed all your birth papers. I've raised you since the day you were born. That's still true. But biologically, your mother and I need to talk to you about who your biological father is." James stared at his shoes. "Is it someone I know?" His voice was small. My father glanced at me, then back at Dr. Patel. She nodded, giving him the script and the choice at the same time. "We don't have all the answers yet," he said carefully. "We need to talk to your mom. But you didn't do anything wrong. You are loved. By me. By your sister. That's real." James's eyes filled, and he blinked hard like he was trying to force the tears back where they came from. I moved my chair closer but didn't touch him until he leaned into me first. Then I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, the way I'd wished someone had done for me at 12 when the world felt fragile and loud. Dr. Patel walked us through concrete next steps, names of a child therapist James could see weekly, a suggestion that we not remove routines, that we add check-ins every night, that school be notified only if James wanted support. "Keep his world as predictable as you can," she said to my father. "Tell the truth in age-appropriate pieces, and answer questions as they come. Don't flood him." When we stood to leave, James tugged my sleeve. "Are you still my sister?" he asked, eyes searching mine. "Yes," I said, and if my voice cracked, no one corrected me. Always. Outside in the pale winter sun, my father stopped beside my car. "Thank you," he said again, quieter. "You were right about doing this with help. I would have made a mess of it." I leaned on the roof, keys in my hand. "You can make a lot of mistakes and still be a good parent if you keep choosing the child," I said. "Keep doing that." He nodded, then winced. "Caroline called," he said. "From a hotel. She wants to talk privately. Her lawyer emailed too." Of course he did. Of course she did. "You need your own counsel," I said. "Someone who represents you, not the firm, not your pride." I hesitated. "And Dad?" "Don't let her blame you into silence. If you're tempted to protect her image, remember who pays the cost." He closed his eyes like the light hurt. "I won't." A beat. Can I call you after I speak with her?" The question was so simple and so new that I felt the sting behind my eyes before I could stop it. Yes, I said, within reason. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're scaffolding. He almost smiled. You sound like your mother. I stared at him. Which one? Ava, he said, certainty anchoring the name. The one who taught both of us how to be decent. That night, the house was a mess of quiet. Daniel made pasta and oversalted it, and we ate every bite like we were grateful to be home. I answered 3 texts from cousins who had been at the party, each some version of, "Are you okay?" I ignored one from a number that looked like it belonged to Thomas Bennett's office. At 9 p.m., my father called. I told Caroline I want a separation. He said without preamble. I asked her to move out. She objected. I told her we'll discuss terms through lawyers. That's good, I said, and meant it. How's James? Asleep on the couch. He asked if I would read him the first chapter of The Hobbit. We haven't done that since he was 9. His voice softened. He asked if you'd come by Saturday. I told him I'd ask. I will, I said. Bring blueberries. We'll make pancakes. After we hung up, I stood at the sink and watched our reflections in the dark window. Me, older than I felt. Daniel behind me, steady as a lighthouse. He slid his arms around my waist and rested his chin on my shoulder. What's the headline for today? He asked. I thought about it. Truth told without spectacle, I said, and a kid went to sleep knowing he was loved. That's a good day, he said. It is, I said. And for the first time since the party, I believed it. Real life doesn't resolve itself in one grand scene. It unspools in emails, court dates, voicemail messages you rehearse 10 times before returning, and grocery lists with eggs, detergent, call therapist written between them. The week after the engagement party, Caroline moved into a serviced apartment near the river. She sent a single text. You humiliated me, then forwarded me a letter from her attorney requesting that I preserve all materials. I replied with our counsel's information and turned off read receipts. That became a theme. Answer what requires answering. Starve what only wants a reaction. My father retained his own lawyer, someone from outside the firm to avoid conflicts. Within a month, he filed for legal separation and requested a court-ordered paternity test for James. The private lab report I'd obtained gave us direction. The court-ordered test gave it standing. The result matched the first. Not a biological parent. James's therapist suggested a careful plan for disclosure beyond what we'd already done. He'd meet with his school counselor once a week, keep routines steady, limit exposure to adult conversations, and, if he wished, have a supervised introduction to his biological father. He did not wish. Maybe later, he said, forehead pressed to my shoulder. When I feel solid again. Thomas Bennett, for his part, attempted to manage the situation like a press crisis. He issued a statement calling the matter deeply personal and private, and clarified that he had always respected the Hayes family. He did not deny paternity. He did not claim it either. His lawyers reached out to my father's lawyers behind closed doors. I didn't ask for details. I only asked whether James's needs remained at the center. My father said yes, and for once, his actions matched his words. The separation became a divorce petition by spring. Caroline's counsel fought hard on optics. Photos from charity events, testimonials about her role as a supportive spouse. The paper record said one thing. The receipts and hotel logs said another. I didn't testify. I didn't need to. The case wasn't about me, and inserting myself would have fed the performance I was trying to end. Meanwhile, our wedding crept closer. Not the spectacle Caroline had once tried to produce, but a small ceremony under maple trees in a park we could walk to. We chose a string trio over a band, handwritten vows over scripted toasts. My dress was simple, pockets deep enough to hold lip balm and a folded note of my mother's recipe for blueberry pancakes that I carried like a talisman. 2 months before the ceremony, my father asked to meet for coffee. He arrived early, hair a little overgrown, suit pressed but lived in. He placed a white envelope on the table between us. I made a mistake once, Starting a conversation with you through money, he said. This isn't that, it's paperwork. He slid it closer. Healthcare proxy, emergency contact forms, a letter to James's school authorizing you to pick him up anytime. It seemed small, but to him, it matters. I signed. It did matter. Small, practical kindnesses often do more than grand speeches ever could. He didn't bring up the engagement party. He didn't apologize theatrically. He said what he'd done wrong in clean sentences and then followed those sentences with acts. On Tuesdays, he took James to chess club and let him lose without fixing it. On Thursdays, he left work early, cooked dinner, badly at first, better with practice, and asked questions that weren't depositions. On Sundays, they planted herbs in mismatched pots on the kitchen sill and named them ridiculous things. Sir Basil, Queen Mint, because laughter helps things grow. I stayed in my lane, sister, not savior, advocate, not arbiter. I learned to say, I can help with that, and just as important, that's not mine to carry. Boundaries stopped feeling like walls and started feeling like door frames, places you pass through with intention. Caroline requested unsupervised time with James. His therapist recommended a gradual schedule. Short visits in public places first, no overnight stays until trust rebuilt, no introductions to new friends without discussion. Caroline agreed on paper, but in practice she struggled. The first time she saw him, she brought gifts he didn't want and asked questions he couldn't answer. When he cried, she panicked, called him ungrateful, then cried too. Progress came later, in smaller ways. A quiet hour at the library, a walk where she listened more than she spoke. A text afterwards that didn't ask for anything in return. Healing rarely looks like triumph. It looks like people trying again without demanding applause. As for Thomas, months passed before he asked to meet James with the therapist present. They sat in a room with soft chairs and a box of tissues, 3 people and a facilitator. James looked at his shoes and then at my father, who gave a small nod that meant you choose. He chose to stay for 15 minutes. They talked about science fiction. When time was up, James said he wasn't ready for more. Thomas, for once, didn't push. I marked that restraint as the first decent choice I'd seen him make. The divorce finalized in early summer. There was no dramatic courthouse scene, just an email with a PDF and a message from my father. It's done. The settlement was standard for our state: equitable division, spousal support for a period, a parenting plan anchored to James's schedule. My father offered to keep the house only if James wanted it. He did, mostly for the kitchen sill and the chessboard. Caroline kept her river apartment and most of the art she'd chosen. My mother's scarf came back in a box without a note. I didn't take it inside. I stood on our stoop and tied it to the maple that shades our building, a flag for something survived. On our wedding day, the sky threatened rain and then changed its mind. Daniel stood under the maple trees, nervous in a way that made his jokes worse and his face softer. My father asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I said no, but asked if he'd meet me halfway. He did. We took 6 steps together, and at step 7, I let go. Not because I was angry, but because that's where the symbolism ended and my life began. We didn't do a bouquet toss or a garter. Instead, we set a small table with framed photos, my mother holding me at 2, my father reading to James under a blanket fort, Daniel with his grandmother making pierogi. We asked guests to write 1 true sentence on a card and hang it from twine between 2 trees. By the end of the night, the line sagged with honest words. I am trying again. I am afraid and showing up anyway. I forgive myself for not knowing sooner. When the music quieted and the park emptied, my father approached, hands in his pockets. Laura, he said, and the word didn't feel like a question anymore. You look like your mother. I hope so, I said. I mean in the way you stand in a room, he added. Like you'll stay upright even if the wind shifts. We didn't say much else. Some things are better lived than discussed. James came over the next morning and flipped pancakes while Daniel pretended to supervise. We ate on the floor because all the chairs were covered in jackets and flowers. Mid-bite, James looked up. When I'm older, he said, blueberry on his chin. I want to do what you do. Burn pancakes? I asked. He shook his head, grinning. Tell the truth and still make breakfast. That, in the end, is the message I carried out of this story. Revenge that doesn't protect someone is just theater. The only version that lasts is boundary setting tied to care, truth told without spectacle, and decisions that keep the most vulnerable person in the room at the center. I didn't get an inheritance. I didn't want one. I got something better. A family made on purpose. A father learning late but sincerely, a brother asleep on a couch after chess club, and a home where secrets have nowhere to grow. If you're standing where I stood, on the edge of revealing a truth that could break things, ask yourself the only question that matters. Who will be safer if I say this out loud? Lead with that. Let the rest take the time it needs.